Let's face it, you saw the announcement for the Mayhem League, with its promise of glorious loot and insane mob density, and in your stupor, thought you might have a chance at winning a demigod's authority, which, let's face it, you definitely won't. But if you're one of the 75% of people who watch my videos and aren't subscribed, I'm going to try to convince you that you do have a shot. So, here are 19 starting builds for the 1 week Mayhem League, one build for each Ascendancy. Welcome! It's your friendly neighbourhood badger here, and I'm back for a stupid amount of content no one should ever attempt to put in a single video. Introducing one build for each Ascendancy geared towards the upcoming Mayhem League. In Mayhem, we will be pitted against hordes of monsters, so naturally, builds that favour clear speed over bossing will be the biggest draw here. Due to there being 5 demigods authorities given as prizes to each Ascendancy throughout each of the 4 modes, softcore trade, hardcore trade, softcore solo self-found, and hardcore solo self-found, this means that there is a total of 5 times 4 times 19, or 380 super blingy swords for you to get your grubby little hands on. Due to there being hardcore and solo self-found variants in Mayhem League, all 19 of the builds showcased in this guide will be solo self-found and hardcore friendly, albeit some more than others. Also, the builds are only guidelines. Due to me having to come up with 19 of them, they aren't going to be fully fledged build guides for each, unless you want this video to be 10 hours long. Please don't comment that you want that, I have a family, please! Down below, you can see that there is a colour bar you can jump to with the face of each Ascendancy at the start of it. Simply click on the timeline underneath the face to jump to the Ascendancy of your choice. We will be starting at Witch and going clockwise around the passive skill tree. And lastly, all Path of Building links will be in the description below, as well as any supporting videos or links to help out certain builds. So, before you realise that you definitely don't have a chance of getting a demigod's authority because Lighty will somehow grind every Ascendancy to level 100 before you can create your character name, let's get into it. Right out of the gate, the first build we have on the menu is an Elementalist Quad Herald Blade Vortex build. Elementalist is generally considered the Golem Ascendancy, but also has some great tools for buffing Heralds to a large extent. With the use of Herald of Ash and Herald of Ice for a crazily small investment, Elementalist can zoom through maps with large pack clear on nothing more than a 5-link. Coupled together with Golem buffs, Elementalist gets a respectable amount of life, life regen, and physical damage reduction, not to mention full ailment immunity. Gearing this character is simple. The only uniques you really want to be aiming for are obliteration ones, but even then, these are the budget clear options, and later a Carcass Jack can be of massive use with its generic AoE. The tree itself is fairly straightforward, picking up life, golem, and herald nodes while filling in damage along the way. Leveling this character is also quite straightforward, using a generic Stormblast Mines and Orb of Storms up until you can collect Blade Vortex, then switching to as many heralds as you can fit in. For all information, check the Path of Building link below. Based on week 1 of all heist leagues, Elementalist has a 4% pick rate, which I consider to be an averagely contested ascendancy for the demigod's prizes. Next up is Necromancer. Contrary to popular belief, I won't be showcasing a minion build here. Instead, let's play with corpses. This build, an Archmage Cremation, actually comes from Octavian, who has crafted a very in-depth guide and path of building, which links will all be below for. Necromancer's inherent cast speed when consuming corpses makes this build extremely clean and smooth to play, and coupled with Archmage damage and defenses with Mind Over Matter, Cremation ends up putting out some very respectable DPS, all the while keeping you safe from harm. Uniques to look for on this build are an Atziri's Foible Amulet and a Crown of the Inward Eye helmet, but even without these uniques, this build kicks ass. Plus, let's not forget Necromancer's block capabilities have still not been nerfed, and it is still very easy to get capped block and spell block with a few nodes on the tree and Bone Offering. Based on week 1 of all heist leagues, Necromancer has a 11.5% pick rate, which I consider to be a highly contested ascendancy for demigod's prizes. Occultist was a bit more of a difficult decision in terms of the build to play in the Mayhem League, but I believe a Bane Pop Occultist will do quite fine against the large mob density. This build, as seen in the Path of Building, is extremely solo self-found friendly and requires no uniques, while reaching a high life pool and a very strong defensive curse setup. The passive skill tree itself is once again quite straightforward, stretching from the Witch, through the Shadow and into the Ranger area to pick up Acrobatics, Phase Acrobatics, and finishing with Wind Dancer. If you can get your hands on Obliteration Wands, they will help immensely for your clear, but due to the inherent explosions from the Occultist Ascendancy, they are not needed. Based on week 1 of all heist leagues, Occultist has a 4.5% pick rate, which I consider to be an averagely contested Ascendancy for the Demigod's prizes. Moving on to the Shadow side of the tree, Assassin has grown in popularity over the past few leagues because of, well, damage. And if you're looking for cheap clear speed, which in Mayhem is really all we want, you cannot pass up Poison Blade Vortex. A tried and true build, it can zoom through maps like nothing else with elusive buffs and poison proliferations, either through Obliteration Wands or Beano's Kitchen Knife. However, those two uniques are not needed. Upgrading to some Cold Iron points later for damage is definitely the way to go, and like the Occultist, we take Acrobatics, Phase Acrobatics, and Wind Dancer for defenses. If you happen to come across a Kintsugi or Carcass Jack for the chest piece, they are both insane upgrades in their own way. Based on week 1 of all heist leagues, Assassin has a 7.3% pick rate, which I consider to be an average to highly contested Ascendancy for the Demigod's prizes. In the Saboteur corner, I would consider this build to be a bit of an underdog, but by no means unheard of. Toxic Rain Mines outshines most other mine builds in terms of clear speed, and while it may not have the highest single target, that isn't what we're after here. Once again very solo self-found friendly, the big upgrades come from a plus levels bow and a Carcass Jack. If you can be bothered to farm Atziri for a bit, Atziri Step Boots is also a great boot upgrade for more defenses. Wind Dancer is the name of the game this league, so once again this build takes as many steps towards evasion and dodge. If you don't get hit, you can't die, right? Based on week 1 of all heist leagues, Saboteur has a 5.3% pick rate, which I consider to be an averagely contested Ascendancy for the Demigod's prizes. Taking a leaf, and indeed a Path of Building link out of Zizaran's book, the zoomiest Trickster build is undoubtedly Essence Drain Contagion. The build provided is created by Zizaran, and therefore there is a very in-depth build video link below in the description. ED Contagion is often started as a life-based build, and then transitions into Energy Shield, which helps immensely against chaos damage. Due to the inherent sustain and clear, this build will demolish all Mayhem content, and can even be played with Spellslinger if you want a little spice in your build latte. Zizaran has included all the passive tree and gear options in the Path of Building, so it is definitely more fleshed out than some of the other builds showcased in this video. If clean, smooth, and consistent clear speed is your thing, then this is the build for you. Based on week 1 of all heist leagues, Trickster has a whopping 19.3% pick rate, which I consider to be an insanely highly contested Ascendancy for the Demigod's prizes. Hang on, a Deadeye that isn't a bow build? What is going on? Due to wanting to craft all these builds to be as hardcore and solo self-found viable as possible, the defensive and solo self-found aspects of Deadeye didn't really hold up. However, Lancing Steel actually turns out to be a very strong skill in the hands of this Ascendancy. Wielding either two-handed or one-hander plus shield, Lancing Steel has amazing coverage with the Deadeye Ascendancy, and allows for you to spec into large amounts of armor and instant warcries. Granted, it still isn't your average Juggernaut levels of tankiness, but it should do well. In Act 6, you can also farm the Lion cards for a chance at a Lionized Vision, a chess piece that is one of the best options for this build. Terminus Est is a wonderful two-handed upgrade for a cheap amount, as well as swapping in lesser multiple projectile support for slower projectiles when clearing. Lastly, the life gain on hit from the Rupture Ascendancy node is extremely underrated, and a great defensive mechanic. Based on week 1 of all heist leagues, Deadeye has a 1% pick rate, which I consider to be a very low contested Ascendancy for the Demigod's prizes. We can all agree that Raider is a very zoomy class. One thing Raider isn't, however, is tanky. So, although this class will be highly uncontested, if playing hardcore, make sure you really pay attention to your defenses. Regardless, the build I've chosen is Frostblades, one of the zoomiest zoomers out there. Either dual wielding or one-handed plus shield, the SSF viability of this build is quite high, yet can be vastly improved with small additions such as the Touch of Anguish Claw. Leveling is extremely straightforward as well, with a clear and concise tree focusing on dodge, evasion, life, and elemental damage. Due to the Avatar of the Veil Ascendancy point, we also achieve elemental ailment immunity with effectively a 100% uptime. If you're looking for the second Fight for Survival threshold duel and in SSF, leveling another character to Act 5 is a viable strategy. Based on week 1 of all heist leagues, Raider has a 0.8% pick rate, which I consider to be a very low contested ascendancy for the Demigod's prizes. Rounding out the Ranger Ascendancies is Pathfinder, and coming in hot with another poison skill is Scourge Arrow. Following suit from about half of the builds already, Evasion and Dodge are our friends here. Aside from this, Flask nodes, Life nodes, and Chaos and Poison nodes on the tree are the way to go, and due to us being a Flask finder, it is by far the tankiest of the Ranger Ascendancies. Shooting your Scourge Arrow and speeding through maps will feel quite clean, all the while being extremely solo self-found friendly, with no required uniques whatsoever. Lastly, the proliferation from the Pathfinder is so vastly overpowered in an event like Mayhem that you will wonder why everyone else chose Champion. I mean, slams are good, but come on. Based on week 1 of all heist leagues, Pathfinder has a 2.3% pick rate, which I consider to be a low contested ascendancy for the Demigod's prizes. Okay, I know what you're thinking. This is just another bonk build, right? Yeah, you're right. I'll be showcasing a Path of Building variant from the racer and content creator Khan, and in all seriousness, this build is a ground slam Impale, abusing the Call of Steel mechanic. In a larger mob density event like Mayhem, Call of Steel actually becomes even stronger, as it compounds upon itself to stack damage and area the more enemies you hit. And unlike a lot of other builds in this guide, this bonk boy is also insane for bossing. However, to get the most out of this build, you'll have to learn about the Warcry rotation of Intimidating and Seismic Cry. I suggest doing a little bit of research on this, especially Khan's video down below in the description. Defensively, there's not much to say. I mean, 90% of the people playing Gauntlet that got high on the ladder were champions. Do I have to say any more? Based on week 1 of all heist leagues, Champion has a 9.5% pick rate, but it has grown in popularity over the league, meaning I consider it to be a very highly contested ascendancy for the Demigod's prizes. For Gladiator, we have the Bleed Blow Glad. Bleed Glow Glad. Dang, I can never get this tongue twister right. With the OP mechanic of Bleed Explosions, coupled with a ranged ability like Split Arrow and Puncture, Bleed Bow Gladiator, got it, excels at clearing packs and moving fast with Challenger charges. Once again, not needing any mandatory uniques, this build gets by quite nicely, but could definitely do with farming Act 6 Lion cards for Lion Eyes Glare, Lion Eyes Vision, or Lion Eyes Fall. Late game, you want to be looking for a high Elder based bow to craft on, but before that you can get by with pretty much any physical bow. Defensively, range is your friend, but to save you in those tough situations, Instant Enduring Cry will keep your life topped up. Other than that, grab those life nodes, baby. Based on week 1 of all heist leagues, Gladiator has an 8.3% pick rate, which I consider to be a highly contested ascendancy for the Demigod's prizes. This is not a drill, Sweep is pretty darn good on Slayer. I like to call this build the Sleeper Sweeper, and for good reason. The area and damage you can put out with the Slayer Ascendancy lends itself to a Whirlwind style build, rivaling the Greats. Bringing in a high life pool and fast movement, Slayer is quite the underdog. Once again, all solo self-found friendly with no required uniques, but Terminus Est is a pretty amazing sword to use, or if you find yourself a nice staff, even switching to a stave-based tree will do quite nicely. Overleech is another extremely underrated defensive mechanic, keeping you more than topped off on health, coupled with Instant Enduring Cry. Safe to say, this build slaps. Sweeps. Based on week 1 of all heist leagues, Slayer has a 0.7% pick rate, which I consider to be a very low contested ascendancy for the Demigod's prizes. Bleed Quake Juggernaut. Slam intensive, tanky, and speedier than you would think, this build excels at not dying. Ever. Not needing any required gear whatsoever, you can grind through the game on rares in every slot and laugh at all those puny ascendants trying and failing to aura stack in a 1-week league. However, if you do manage to find yourself a pair of Haemophilia gloves, your clear will reach Usain Bolt and Sonic's baby levels of speed. Keeping with the bottom side of the tree trend, instant Warcries are a little too OP, so make sure you abuse them. But hey, the tree builds itself from there, just picking up every life node you see, and also a few bleed nodes. Based on week 1 of all heist leagues, Juggernaut has a 2.5% pick rate, which I consider to be a low contested ascendancy for the Demigod's prizes. There had to be an Earthshatter build in here somewhere, and Berserker takes the cake with this skill. Utilising Warcries, Rage, and overall macho-ness, this big lad slams and shouts constantly, living up to his name. Being a Marauder, you have a crazy amount of access to life nodes on the tree, and by picking up as much as you can, coupled with Warcry nodes, there's not much that will stand in your way. Leaping from pack to pack, getting in the rhythm of slam and Warcry rotation can take a little bit of getting used to, but pays off when you get the cycles down. Relying on nothing more than a good two-handed physical weapon, Earthshatter smooths the gap between clear speed and bossing ability. Hey, you won't be as fast as a Poison Blade Vortex assassin, but by golly will you be laughing when Conquerors cannot kill you. Based on week 1 of all heist leagues, Berserker has a 0.7% pick rate, which I consider to be a very low contested ascendancy for the Demigod's prizes. It wouldn't be Marauder if all 3 of the ascendancies weren't slam based, right? Well, Chieftain is no exception, and this time we're going with Tectonic Slam. Look, right off the bat, if you're masochistic and want to grind for 8 hours on League Start to get an Oni Goroshi, by all means be my guest. It's amazing for the build, but you can get by very handsomely with a good crafted two-hander. With easy endurance charge generation for Tectonic Slam area and damage, it's the perfect fit for a fiery, beefy boy like Chieftain. I mean, with Fist of War and full endurance charges, Tectonic Slam will be covering your screen. Now that's clear speed, right? Also, Tectonic Slam has a higher base attack speed than many other slams, so even though you're doing big hits, you'll still feel not too locked into attack animations, an obvious upside for this skill. Based on week 1 of all heist leagues, Chieftain has a 9.5% pick rate, which I consider to be a highly contested ascendancy for the Demigod's prizes. Hierophant is also colloquially dubbed the Totem Ascendancy, so naturally, I'm recommending Stormbrand. In Mayhem, totems will fall quite flat due to the clunky nature of resummoning them on every pack, and brands will more than make up for that due to also being able to abuse Archmage and Mind Over Matter, something Hierophant excels at. Clearing with Stormbrand is as simple as zooming through packs and placing down brands every so often, and then juggling Arcane Cloak with your brands on bosses. Defensively, as stated before, Mind Over Matter and mana stacking is more than enough to keep you healthy throughout any hardcore content, even on an entirely solo self-found budget. However, looking for a Cloak of Defiance, Etziri's Foible, or Crown of the Inward Eye will boost your damage and survivability through the roof. Lastly, getting your hands on a medium cluster duel with the Holy Conquest node, your clear will become godlike. Based on week 1 of all heist leagues, Hierophant has a 5.5% pick rate, which I consider to be an averagely contested ascendancy for the Demigod's prizes. Okay, finally we're at an ascendancy where I can talk about minions. Dominating Blow has always been a Guardian staple for solo self-found, and in Mayhem this will be no exception. The build practically builds itself, without the need for any mandatory gear. However, a Writhing Jar and the Scourge Claw are both insane for the build, so if you can get your hands on them, by all means go ahead. Once your Dominating Blow minions are summoned in each map, the clear more than makes up for the slow start you may have at the beginning of each zone. Herald of Purity Sentinels help immensely with boss damage, and the inherent tankiness of the Guardian Ascendancy makes this build more than viable for hardcore. Based on week 1 of all heist leagues, Guardian has a 1.9% pick rate, which I consider to be a low contested ascendancy for the Demigod's prizes. Freezing Pulse has always been a viable skill in Path of Exile, in one way or another. Interestingly, this is the only self-cast spell build I'm recommending for these builds, and Inquisitor is definitely the place to do so. Stretching over the Templar, Witch and Shadow areas of the tree, Freezing Pulse can pull out some massive screen-wide clear, all the while dealing enough damage to permafreeze most white to yellow tier map bosses. Defensively, a semi-hybrid approach is the best option, but honestly, you'll be surprised how tanky a crit cold spell like Freezing Pulse feels. If the enemies can't move, they can't deal damage. With 2 of the Freezing Pulse threshold jewels, you can afford to use the pinpoint support, meaning your damage on bosses ramps up to some pretty ludicrous levels. However, getting your hands on a second First Snow jewel in Solid Self-Found is a bit sketchy, unless you want to grind a second character to Act 5. Based on week 1 of all heist leagues, Inquisitor has a 1.7% pick rate, which I consider to be a low contested ascendancy for the Demigod's prizes. And lastly, we have the Ascendant. Rounding out the 19 builds, unfortunately I won't be recommending an Aura Stacker. Instead, we have an Agnostic Mind Over Matter Ball Lightning Miner. Yes, I know it's a mouthful, but the build speaks for itself. Extremely tanky, relatively fast clear, and boss damage out the wazoo, this build lasts in the face of degens and direct hit damage, all while sustaining Righteous Fire constantly. Granted, a necessary item is a Foreboding Eternal Mana Flask, but with a few alterations, this is pretty easy to come by. Other upgrades, like many mana builds, are Atziri's Foible, Cloak of Defiance, and lastly, Indigon from Uber Elder. However, those items are definitely not needed and the build functions on less gear, albeit a little slower. So if you're up for a very unique feeling build with a lot of flavour and character, this Ascendant build will definitely be for you. In all other gear slots, it's just life, mana and resistances, and will be fairly easy to cap everything if you're paying attention. Based on week 1 of all heist leagues, Ascendant has a 2.3% pick rate, which I consider to be a low contested ascendancy for the Demigod's prizes. Well, that is the end of the 19 Builds Mayhem video. It's been a massive undertaking, but thank you so much for watching. If you're still watching all the way through, a big thumbs up to you, just like you're going to thumbs up this video, right? Yeah, thank you so much for watching. We are done here, and I will like to push just a little bit of a thank you to all of my patrons over on Patreon. You can see their names up on the screen now. If you want to become a patron and really help me out financially as I try to still do all of this full time, there's a link down below as well. I do stream live on Twitch most days as well, so definitely come say hi. If you've got any questions about any of these builds, I'm more than happy to help. And lastly, if you've got any other recommendations of what build you think you might be playing in the Mayhem League, comment down below. Let me know, and we're going to have some fun times. So, thank you so much for watching, everyone, and until next time, Badger out.